Hi, Barry Eaton here, and welcome to Radio Out There. Emily, lovely to welcome you to Radio Out There. And aloha, I should say.
Yes, aloha.
Love Hawaii. And you've been there for a few years now.
Yes, I came over 8 years ago.
Oh,
And we came here because my husband had lived here long before I knew him, and he loved it. And when we came here on our honeymoon, wherever we went, we'd run into people on the street that he knew. And I said, that's really bizarre. It's been a long time since you've been here. And he said, well, people either live there like forever or they come and go shortly, but
yeah.
he stayed friends with all these people. And there aren't that many people that actually live on Maui. It's mostly tourists coming.
Tourists,
There's
yeah.
millions of them actually,
Yeah. Mm.
but there weren't that. So it's easy to get to know a lot of the people that live on the island with you. And it just was wonderful. 2 years before he died, he knew that he was declining, and he said, that's where I really want to be. So that's what we did. We came here and I fell in love with it. So I stayed.
Good for you. Now, talking of husbands, in my research for my books and my program, I found over the years that people who are working in areas such as you, working in grief, and healers, shall we say, have to explore or plumb the depths of their own life to be able to have that inspiration and also the empathy to work with people. Now, your story involves grief and the death of two husbands. Do you sort of summarize that for us?
Well, I was married to Jacques for 22 years, and he was a wonderful person, and he was a lot older than I was, so it didn't really come as a surprise that he died. But he was great, and I never dreamed I'd be married to anybody else. He also was an expert. He was a philosophy professor, and his specialty was bioethics and the living and dying. So he did a lot of work on that. So for all those years, we'd had lots of conversations about things that kind of opened up my world quite a bit. And I had worked as a nurse, a vocational nurse, while I was putting myself through college. So I had lots of experience with death and dying there too. And then I never dreamed I'd get married again. Didn't want to, because I was perfectly happy that I'd been married to such a wonderful person. But I met Ron, and everything changed, and we fell in love and got married, and we were together for 10 years. And he was he had a really rich life with different careers and things that he'd done that were real high power negotiation things, and very exciting. But later in life, he decided he wanted to be a minister. So he gave all that up and became a minister in the New Thought kind of ministry. And we had a great life together.
But it was the grief that you found in both of those deaths that inspired you and moved you into where you are today.
That's right.
So you founded, amongst other things, and the facilitator of the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Tell me about that.
Well, after I wrote my first book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief, I had been doing an online group of people that we'd just get together, and I'd give them subjects to write on, and then we'd talk about it. And they all had to do with grief, because writing about my grief had helped me a lot. And I thought I could show other people the kinds of things that were helping me, and they said it helped them a lot too. So it was really good. But I kind of felt like there was something missing in all that I was doing. And I remembered that I had read Marcy Shimoff's book called Happy for No Reason after Jacques died, and that had helped me. And I thought, it's happiness that's missing. So I started researching Marcy and discovered that she had a program called the Happy for No Reason Certified Trainer Program. And I went through that, and mostly because she's done so much research and so much speaking, and she's just a real expert in happiness. And when you get certified in her program, you can use anything that she's done however you want to bring happiness to other people. And I thought, well, what can I do with that? And I thought grief and happiness, because that's what's missing when people are dealing with grief, is they're so involved in the grief that they forget there's still their life to live. And the happiness can lighten that and make it easier. Doesn't take it away, but it supports them and gives them comfort in their grief. And that's what I wanted to do. So I came up with the concept of the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Well, first I came up with the Grief and Happiness podcast, and I've been doing that. I've got almost 200 episodes out now, talking to people about grief and happiness together. And when I decided that I would change my writing group that I'd been doing online into a grief and happiness group, where we would still do writing, but the aim of the writing with the topics that I'd give them related to grief also were related to happiness. And then we would write, we'd get in small groups and talk about our writing. So we'd have somebody to speak our grief to and listen to theirs. And then we learn a happiness practice every time. And when I wanted to do that, I thought, I don't know if people are going to buy this concept of grief and happiness, because when I mentioned it to people, they go, those two words don't go together. So I decided to do a pilot program, and I invited a bunch of different people that I know from around the country to try it out with me. And they did. And they ended up just loving it. And when we were having our kind of after when we were tying it up, I said, my one issue that I don't quite know how to deal with is, it costs money to do things like this, to have my podcast and to do the meetings and all the little things that adds up. But I don't want to charge these people to have help with their grief. And they said, well, we'll fix that. We'll just start a nonprofit organization, and that will provide it. And it'll give a perceived value to the people, so they don't feel like they're getting something for free that doesn't have any value. They're getting something that somebody else thinks enough of how important it is to pay for it for them to be able to enjoy it.
That's wonderful. Now, looking at grief as a huge emotion in our life, grief has many faces, though, doesn't it? It's not only with the death of a person in your life, a loved one. It can be the death of a relationship. It can be the death of the ending in many, many different ways. And there are so many forms of grief. So tell us what your thoughts are on the faces of grief.
There's so much similarity in how we deal with all the different kinds of grief, but there are tons of different kinds of grief. I've had people in my house, not in my house, in my group, that one of them was in one of the California wildfires and lost their home, all their animals, all their business, was because they worked from home, an accounting firm. So they had all those financial records for people and they lost all of that. And she really had a lot of grief to deal with. And then here in Maui recently, we lost a whole community within a few hours to a fire. We'll never know how many people were killed.
No, that was terrible, wasn't it?
They couldn't find. Yes, it was amazing. So here's another loss of not only grief, not only your loved ones, but your home, your jobs. Because the businesses were burned down too. Their jobs, their possessions, their friends, their culture, their history. So many things were lost all at once. So I'm putting together right now a group that, like the one that I do online, for people who've been dealing with their feelings from the fire, so that they'll write about it, talk to each other about it, listen to each other about it, and learn happiness practices at the same time. So there's so many: death of pets, loss of jobs, loss of a home. There just
There's so many. I mean, it goes even global, where you can be full of grief about what's going on in the world. I mean, what a chaotic world we're in. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are perhaps grieving the past.
Yes, that's right. And that's important to think of too. Some people, like when my father died, my mother couldn't get over it.
Mm.
And my sister was even worse when her husband died, and she didn't get up out of her chair unless she had to go to the doctor's appointment. And she just sat in a chair around the clock watching TV or having the television on in front of her. And she just gave up. And in watching the examples of both my mom and my sister, I felt terrible for them. But at the same time, I thought, I'm not going to do that. That's very important to me to not do that. I'm sure my husbands would be very unhappy with me if they saw me doing that, that they would want me to experience my life and help other people in the process.
Well, that's it, isn't it? But covering so many different fields, that must be very difficult for you because, as you say, it could be 1 minute somebody, the death of a person, a pet, a job, a relationship, or something much, much bigger than that. The loss in a fire, the loss of a job, the loss of your business, loss of your home. How do you cope with such a wide variety of grief and help people in those areas?
The common denominator is loss, because in all those areas, it's loss that they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And when we focus on that and get what I do is encourage them to very much live in the moment. And in this moment, they're okay. You know, this moment, things that you had before you don't have, when you don't know what you're going to have in the future. So really the moment is all you've got. So when you make that the very best that it can be, it doesn't matter what kind of loss it was. It can make your life better. You can make your life better by focusing on what's good for you to live your best life.
Mm. Yes, I've worked with, through my dreams and my various other things, an ancient Chinese philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu. I don't know whether you've heard of him. Now, yes. I have it sitting up in my studio here now, and I'll quote it for you. If you are depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. But if you are at peace, you are living in the present. Now, that was 5,000 years ago, but boy, does it apply in 2023.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I was talking about. It doesn't matter what kind of loss it is. We're all in that same spot that he just described, and that's perfect example.
Exactly. Now, Emily, you've been talking about loss, and as I mentioned to you before we started, I've written several books and a trilogy on the afterlife, and based on life, the fact that we are not a body with a spirit, but we are actually a soul having a human experience via our human body. And on that basis, we never die. We just go back to where we came from. So I've always worked out that loss is not something. I was told that when my partner passed away in 1997, and I was told, no, she was not lost. She just went through a door into another dimension. So do you think the word loss is also something that we need to look at? Can that be a kind of catalyst for grief?
Absolutely. We, as I said, loss is a common denominator, but it's all in how you look at things.
Yes.
And if you can see that loss as, instead of something that we're all sharing loss, we also are all sharing, we're alive. And I was at a workshop recently, and the man who was speaking said, you know what will be great to start your day every day? He said, when you wake up, stretch and look up and say, I woke up.
Yes.
I thought that's so cool.
Good one. Yeah.
Because that's when we live awake, then we can experience these experiences, and we can look at them, and we can figure out what it is that we want to do and what's best for us and best for our loved ones.
Yes, I think a lot of people think they're awake, but they're not. They're just flushed with emotions. So being awake is not just having your eyes open physically,
Mhm.
but it's having your eyes, your heart, your emotions, everything open and receiving and sharing. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's what it is. The people that you see that get stuck in grief or spend the most time in grief are the ones that can only see right here.
Yeah, very true. The
That,
blinkers.
that's all they've got. Just
Mm,
right what they can see right in front of them is all they can relate to.
mm,
And when you can like I think it's very important to go outside. And when you can be outside and see the vastness of the world that you live in, look up at the stars at night, look at the gorgeous clouds in the
yeah.
daytime, you can see how vast we are and how small we are. I had one of the first times I flew someplace and had a window seat and was looking down. I thought, wow, you can't see any people at all.
Mm,
The people are so small, and it put everything in perspective for me to
mm,
see that we're all like ants. You know, we know us and what's going on in our limited atmosphere here. That when we look at it as part of a giant whole,
mm.
then it makes a big difference.
It does. So what do you see the purpose of grief is?
The purpose of grief is a transition.
Mm-hmm.
We go through a lot of transitions in life. It's when you're madly in love with someone and they're there one day and they're gone the next, life isn't the same for you,
Mm,
and it can't be the same for you. And you have to, the transition helps you figure out, okay, now that my situation is different, what do I do now?
mm,
And that's the process that grief takes you through. Of you've got to get through this sadness, the sorrow, the tears, all that comes with when someone you love dies. And you also can focus on the fabulous life that you had with them, the beautiful times and things that if you wouldn't have had that relationship, you wouldn't have had those experiences.
mm.
So grief allows you to go through a lot of those things and process those things. And like the writing group that I do on Zoom now, the Grief and Happiness Alliance, I have no problem every week coming up with something for them to write about that focuses on happiness, actually, with love woven in. And that by the end of the group or the gathering, every time, everybody's smiling in the group.
Mm,
And that's, I see what grief does is allow you to be able to transition from the deep sorrow, the deep pain, into a place where you can be comfortable with happiness again.
yeah, yeah, that's a delightful way of doing it. Mm. What about the spiritual aspect of grief?
This, I think, what I see is people who are very spiritual, or even if they're really believe in whatever religion or belief that they have, that the process of grief seems to be easier
Mm,
because they have something to hang on to. When you think of, like my husband Ron always said, he never talked about dying, he talked about transitioning. It
yes,
was just
I saw that in the book. Very good.
yeah.
Mm,
It was not the end of something, it was the beginning of something else.
right,
And
exactly.
that's how I look at it with spirituality, that
Mm,
it's the beginning of the next step.
very true, very true. If I can, I don't normally do this. In fact, I don't think I've ever done it before. My second book I wrote is called, I'll hold it up for the TV audience, called No Goodbyes. And it talks about, it's follow-up to my first book, Afterlife. And I connected through a wonderful medium here in Australia with Judy, my late partner, and she was telling us about life on the other side. And if I can just quote you from this, um, I wasn't even thinking about it until it popped into my mind as I was preparing for our chat. So I figure somebody's put it in there, either that my subconscious has that me. Anyway, I'll just read this out for you if you don't mind. We only parted, we were only together 4 years, but we had a very strong soul contact. and it was very distressing. But Judy said that was what pain of grief is all about. Grief takes us through emotions that we would not otherwise experience or even recognize. She explained how the emotions and pain that we suffer in grief will eventually go on to become part of our life review in spirit. Now, that put a whole new dimension on that for me, because my findings are that when we cross over, we go through all sorts of things, but we do have a life review, sort of like the end of a sports game when the coach gets together with the team and looks back on what you've done. So if that's part of the life review, then grief is a very, very essential part of our life process. What do you think?
I believe that. I see that. I see people that have the most trouble are the ones that deny grief or deny the necessity of grief. Don't think
hold
that
it right inside themselves.
Yes.
And don't let it out.
Yeah. I've heard, like, one person told me that they only had the weekend off after their loved one died, and they had the funeral was pretty close together there. It was just a few days, and she was expected to go back to work immediately.
Oh, that's terrible.
And when she was an office kind of a job, and she was sitting at her desk, and she said she just started crying. She wasn't like bursting into tears for everybody to see. She was just crying. Yeah. And her boss came up to her and said, "Aren't you over that yet?"
Oh, what?
It's like you have the funeral and then you forget about whoever it was. Yeah. They're not in your life anymore. And that, I feel sorry for the boss because he doesn't have a clue of what life's all about. And there's a lot of people like him out there, a lot of people. And they're the ones that have a really tough time adjusting to the loss of a loved one, because they don't have this process that they go through of grieving, because they just block it out.
Mm-hmm. But that is a very cold and lack of passion to do something like that in life, isn't it? You wouldn't want to work for somebody like that. I think I was resign on the spot.
No, she didn't work for him any longer.
Oh, yeah, bet she didn't. Good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked before about the blinkers, and quite often we have the blinkers on. Now, you've written the Grief and Happiness Handbooks. You've done all sorts of wonderful books. But how do people start to take the blinkers off?
By deciding to.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. It's when you realize where you are and that you don't have to be there and that you can do things differently. You're not going to just all of a sudden throw your hands in the air and say, "Yay, I'm ready," you know.
No, of course not.
No. It comes step by step. And that's why I believe writing is such an essential part of grief, because you can, you can work through all those things together.
Yeah, writing is also, but you talk about that in your book a lot, about the writing element, and that is one way of expressing it, isn't it? Expressing your grief. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to write a story. Tell us about your ideas of writing, how it can help people.
Well, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Losing my voice. I do that a lot. I think I talk too much. But
you're just getting emotional there, Emily.
There. Maybe that's what it is. I can tell you what happened with me. When Ron died, I was it was a tough time for me, because I was here on Hawaii and I'd only been here 2 years, and I'd been with him and his illness and what was going on that whole time, and hadn't had much of a chance to get to know the island or know more than just the people who lived around me. And so I found myself alone a lot. And a few months after Ron died, a very good friend of his who was much younger, and they were family friends, but he just dropped dead on his way home from work one day. Wasn't sick, didn't have any issues, and I knew his wife had no idea what to do at that moment. And I knew that she was going to be getting all kinds of advice that here, do this, and here, do that, or don't do this. And I was very concerned about her, and I would have handled it differently if I still lived around the corner from her, like I did when we were together on the mainland. And I thought, how can I support her? So I decided to write her a note and mail it to her every week for the first year. And that had me go through, I sat down before I started writing, and I thought, if I'm going to tell her I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit to it. I've got to have 52 different things to say. And so I wrote out the 52 different things, and I thought, wow, this is an outline for a book. And it actually turned into both my books, because they're both 26 chapters long, and each one of them has one of those things that I wrote to her about. And that helped me so much in helping somebody else with her grief. I was helping myself at the same time, and ultimately helping a whole lot more people through my books. And I eventually got those cards published too. They just came out. And so that other people can take advantage of my writing. And they don't have to write about it, but it can stimulate them to write. I encourage people to, like, if you pick up one of the cards and read it, write what your feelings are about it. How are you using this information?
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I think the idea of the cards is very good. A lot of people might think, oh, well, that's a bit funny for cards, but I use cards all the time. Just sometimes use your intuition, shuffle the cards, and out comes the right message. I use the runes quite a lot, all those sort of things. And they can help if you open yourself up and trust. Now, some of the other things you talk about in your book, writing, gratitude, affirmations, and companionship. Now, you talked about loneliness and everything like that. So companionship is also very, very important, isn't it?
It's so important. Yeah, it's really important. And a lot of times you'll discover that you need some different friends than you had before. And I'm not saying you don't have the friends from before now, but there's something that you need to add to your community. And I know I do a thing at my house every week on Fridays from 5 to 6. Anybody who has produce from their garden in excess of it, bring them to my house and we'll all exchange it. We call it the produce exchange. And yeah, it's really nice. And it turns out that 2 of the women that came every week ended up having their husbands die within that first year that we were doing it. And we've done it for 8 years now, because I started it when we first moved here, and I had so much tropical fruit in my yard that there's no way that the 2 of us could eat it. And I wanted people to be able to take advantage of it. But these 2 women that I made friends with, I was so glad that I met them. I wouldn't have met them any other way. And we were able to support each other and do things with or for each other in a way that we have a different kind of relationship than I have with anybody else. And there's somebody that I can call on. If I just had surgery on my foot, and I called one of them and said, can you take me to the hospital and pick me up after the surgery is over? And it's no problem. I didn't have to worry about it, because we just support each other. And that's that companionship with these people, having somebody to go to a concert with, or go take an art class with, or something that gets you. Yeah, go for a walk. Absolutely. Whatever you want to do. But one of them, we used to meet for coffee, or chai for me, because I'm not a coffee drinker. But there was a place close by that you could sit outside, and we'd just get something to drink and sit there and talk for a couple of hours. And it was so good. And it wasn't that we had anything in particular we had to talk about, but we never had a problem with conversation. And it would just, knowing that you can hear somebody else's voice and they can hear yours is really important. And they get you in a way that your friends who are also dealing with the loss of your loved one, it's not the same.
Do a lot of very helpful or make a lot of very helpful points in your handbook to help people to be able to move on. And talk about moving on, as you said, change can often be a very important development as well, whether it's changing your house, changing your possessions, where you associate with the person or whatever's happened in your life, but just moving on, changing. What?
I say, yeah. And instead of moving on, I say moving forward.
Oh, moving
Because
forward. Yeah, fair enough.
moving
Good
on
point.
implies that you've left
You're
everything
putting it
else
behind. No.
behind.
Yeah, fair enough.
But you can move forward. And I did that. I had lived in my house with Jacques for 22 years, and I figured I'd be there forever.
Mm,
That was my home.
sure.
And after he died, it it wasn't anymore. It was a big 4-bedroom house with a big yard that had a pool that had to
Mm,
be taken care of. And I thought, this is overwhelming to me.
mm,
I need to do something different.
mm. But his energy
And
would
so
have
I
left there
did.
as well, wouldn't it?
Yes, his energy was there, and I loved his energy there. It was really nice, but I realized that I had so many other things. I had pictures of him. I had memories of his beautiful singing voice.
Mm,
I had lots of different things that I could keep close to my heart, that I didn't have to have the house. And one thing I've really realized with these deaths have been the significance of stuff, because the house is just another form of stuff.
just another
Like,
possession.
yeah, I have way too many possessions. It seems like I'm always decluttering because I'll be having things accumulate.
Yeah.
And when you can release yourself from stuff and spend your time in the moment, the stuff really doesn't matter.
Mm,
So when you can I didn't know how I was going to feel when I left that house, but it turned out to be the best thing I could have done for me at that time.
mm,
And I'm really glad that I did it. And
mm,
I'm also really glad that I'm staying here in this house now, because I'm very comfortable here. It's where I want to be, even though Ron died right on the other side of that wall. That doesn't bother me at all, because we were here through the whole process. All of his friends and family were here, and it was a beautiful experience.
mm,
And the places where he wanted to live, and when I saw it and got used to Maui, I said, I totally understand.
mm,
It's so fabulous here. It
mm,
seemed like everything in California was in such a rush all the time. And
mm,
the
mm,
traffic was terrible. I'd get so uptight when I
mm,
was driving.
yeah,
And the highest speed limit here is 55 miles an hour, and there are only a couple of roads that you can go that fast on.
mm,
And there are no freeways on the island at all.
mm,
So it is a whole different pace of life.
mm,
And I just, by writing down what I'm grateful for every day, I write in my journal different things that I'm grateful for. I never run out of things that I'm grateful for.
mm,
I can continue every day writing things that I'm grateful for. And by focusing on that, I really appreciate what's important to me.
mm. Look, I agree. I do not go to sleep at night unless I have expressed my gratitude for at least 3 things on that day alone. And it helps so much. Helps me go to
Me
sleep,
too.
helps me round off my day, and it helps me connect with my inner self
Yes.
and those on the other side. Now, speaking on the other side, have you contacted or been contacted by Ron or your first husband? Because I feel that's also part of, if it can help the grieving process, maybe because I'm a medium, but I've got so much comfort from just connecting with the other side.
Well, there are so many things that happen all the time that I just have to believe that that's where they came from. There was a period about a year ago, I guess, that I was going through kind of a down. It was 5 years after Ron had died, and I just, for some reason, I was really missing him then. And I
Mm,
started
mm,
having all these things show up. But one of them was, we got married on January 1st, 2011. So that was 1111.
right.
And our address is 222. And so I keep seeing those numbers every time I turn, every time I look at the clock. It was one of those times, and they just show up every place. And I kept thinking that's like him saying hi to me.
Mm,
And another thing that we had when we were first together, I came home one day and he said, I heard our song today. And I said, oh, really? What's our song? And he said, oh, you'll listen to it and you'll like it. And it was a song called As, A-S, As, by Stevie Wonder.
Oh, yeah.
And when I listened to it, I thought that's us. That just, I understood exactly what he was saying.
Mm.
Well, when I need it, that song pops up. It's either used as a background on a commercial, or we used to watch the show Blackish together. That was a really interesting show. I didn't watch it when it first came on because I thought it was going to be just dumb, but it wasn't. It was a comedy, but it was deep. And when they had their final episode, I was watching it and thinking, oh, I wish that Ron could be here with me watching this, because we enjoyed it, watching it together so much. And at the end of it, all the characters came together and they were walking down the street, holding hands, everybody together with As playing in the background.
Ah, that's wonderful. That's amazing.
So,
Well, I think if people open up, because most people have a dream after somebody passes over, and that is the most common way of connection, just to let you know I'm over here, I'm okay, sort of thing. But if we can open ourselves up, because what you're doing with your wonderful institute, or alliance, I should say, is to help people to help themselves. But there are so many things they can do. And I think one of the things that comes across in your book is the importance of love. And
absolutely.
love does not have to leave your life because somebody has passed over.
Absolutely. And love, for a while, I was thinking, and this happened before Ron died, I was contemplating what was most important in my life. And I realized that what was most important in my life was love, and unconditional love, giving and receiving unconditional love, both ways.
Yeah.
And when I really focused on that, then it changed my life. And I've stayed there ever since. And I'm tell people now, they're kind of surprised when I say this, but I'm happier now than I ever have been. As much as I love both of my husbands and love being with them, I have a kind of peace about me that I never used to have. And I feel that love. It's so easy to give love. It's so easy to receive love when that's what you're focusing on. And that it makes your life feel so much better when you can really, really embrace that.
Well, I think to be able to accept love, it might come from a person, it might come from a pet, it might come from a friend, another family member, many, many different ways. But I think a lot of people do feel, initially anyway, that now that person has transitioned, we'll use Ron's words, now they've transitioned, that's the love of my life, all gone, that's it. But it's not the case, is it? Not the case at all.
No, it's not. That love, I tell everybody when they ask me how long grief lasts, I say, as long as you're alive, because you carry your loved one in your heart always. You don't get over grief. You don't say, one of the problems that I had between Jacques and Ron was I didn't feel unmarried to Jacques. And so it made me feel, because they say till death do you part, but just because he died didn't make me feel like we weren't as connected as we ever had been. And I felt funny trying to have a deep relationship with somebody else, because I felt like it wasn't quite right. And one day Ron said something about my ex-husband, and I said, oh, wow, he is not my ex-husband. He's my husband who died, but that I don't feel unmarried to him. And that's when it dawned on me what I was feeling. And I realized that I could have room in my heart for both of them. And it wasn't a problem. It wasn't competition. I learned that it bothered Ron when I would talk about Jacques too much. So I kept that to myself, or I talked to somebody else about it. But it was important for me to see that people say things to me like, well, how could you love two husbands? And because people have commented on me having both of my husband's last names, who are Thiroux and Threatt. And they say, how can you love more than one person at a time? And I said, how many children do you have?
Yes, precisely.
You know, you love lots of people at the same time. You love your mother and your father. You
Mm.
know, it's you love all your friends or all your siblings. It's okay. Love is a big thing, and it can expand forever. You
Well,
can
there are
have
many
all the
expressions
love.
of love, aren't there? Love can
Oh
express
yeah.
itself in our life in so many different ways, so many different emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So why just say, well, that's it? But not only that, I mean, to say ex-husband, that sort of, to me, denotes divorce.
Yes.
You weren't
Yeah.
divorced from Jacques.
Mm-mm.
He passed over. So
Yeah.
there's still that connection there. That's what I mean about the soul connection from the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they passed over doesn't mean to say that we'll never ever see them again. And it doesn't mean to say
Yes.
they're not around us. And that's what I've written in
Mm-hmm.
my books. Now, I'm not trying to plug my books, but I'm just saying that I think if more people can realize that we are surrounded by our spirit family and all sorts of helpers, we are not alone, and we can open our hearts and our minds. But so many people have closed hearts and closed minds.
Absolutely. And when you allow that to come through, I can give you an example of that. The other day, a friend of ours, of Ron's and mine, is going to be installed as a practitioner in
Mm.
the Centers for Spiritual Living. And since it's here in Maui, she's the only one. So she's throwing herself a big service to do it. And it's going to be really nice. And she called me the other day and she said, I'd like you to do a spiritual reading for it. And I said, sure. I said, what do you want me to read? She said, I'll leave that up to you. And as soon as she said that, I swear Ron told me what it is that I'm supposed to read.
Well,
Because
why not?
yeah, it was just right there. I knew that it was from him. It was
Mm.
something that he liked, and it was absolutely perfect for the occasion.
Perfect. There you are. Yeah.
And I just, that was just a absolute proof
Oh,
for
yeah.
me.
Yeah. Oh, I was nagged from Spirit by Judy to write my first book. Kept on at me all the time. When are you going to write the book? So I did. It changed my life. So they do contact us, and they are still around us, and that I think is a lovely note to be able to finish on. So very briefly, where do you go from here?
I am continuing on this path that I'm on. It leads me to different adventures all the time. I love being on podcasts and interviewing people on podcasts. I
Mm.
just think that that's a great way to spread this. And we have actually, the nonprofit organization has created a training program for facilitators so that I won't be the only facilitator for these meetings, these gatherings anymore. And we can spread them around the world and just
Yeah.
expand all this love and help with grief.
So if people want to contact you, best through your website or what?
Mm-hmm. You can email me at Emily at loving, I'm sorry, that's one of my addresses, Emily at griefandhappiness.com.
Right.
And the website is griefandhappiness.com. So they're easy to remember. The book is the Grief and Happiness Handbook, and all the proceeds from the book go directly to the nonprofit to support the work that they do.
Mm. Mm.
And the cards that just came out, all the proceeds from the cards also go to the nonprofit to
Oh,
support the
well,
work.
that's lovely. I mean, what about your podcast? Where can people listen
My
to that?
podcast is
Yeah.
Grief and Happiness.
Oh, funny about that.
Yeah. So kind of in a rut here, but that way it's recognized. If people hear grief and happiness, they know it's one of my things.
Good for you. Emily, it's been wonderful talking to you. And thank you so much for the great work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed talking to you.
My pleasure.